Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The laughter carried easily through the thin walls of Brookhaven's pilot lounge, sharper than it needed to be, a little too intentional. Every chuckle had a target, and she knew it was her. On the runway, the sun beat down against the aluminum skins of a few tired Cessnas. Their shadows stretched across cracked asphalt like faint scars. In one of them, a woman sat quietly, tying her hair into a simple ponytail as though she had all the time in the world. She didn't. Not really. But appearances mattered, and at Brookhaven Regional, appearances were all anyone ever noticed. Meline Hayes, Meline to the few who bothered to say her name correctly, wasn't much to look at in this setting. Worn jeans, a leather jacket that had seen better decades, boots scuffed from years of tarmac. No insignia, no medals, no hint of what she once carried in the skis. To the kids fresh out of aviation school, she was just another small plane instructor who barely earned enough to keep her Cessna fueled. But she had one thing none of them understood: silence. She wore it like armor. Another thrilling adventure in the mighty Cessna 172. One voice called out through the static of the radio, the laughter of a half-dozen boys bleeding in. Tyler Brooks, 22, swagger heavier than his logbook. He thought the headset gave him an audience, not realizing the whole frequency caught his mockery. Her student, Hannah Lee, winced. The girl was only on her third lesson, her hands gripping the yoke as though it might break under her fingers. "Don't they know we can hear them?" Hannah whispered. Meline's gaze stayed on the horizon, calm, almost detached, though a flicker of something sharp moved behind her eyes. "They know, and it doesn't matter." "But it's cruel." "Let them talk." Her tone cut the air clean, not angry, not pleading, just steady. Often the loudest voices belong to those who know the least. Silence settled again, broken only by the hum of the old Cessna engine. Hannah swallowed, a blush of anger still rising in her cheeks. But Meline had already turned her focus back to crosswind corrections, guiding the girl's trembling hands. She explained the angle, the timing, the patience it took to let the aircraft settle into the sky instead of forcing it. Her voice softened, almost lyrical. "Trust the wind." Hannah blinked. "Like yesterday when you said that." "Yes. But how did you know to say it like that? It felt like you lived it. Like you trusted it with more than just a training flight." Meline's hands lingered against the worn dashboard, her knuckles brushing the metal as if it were alive. A shadow passed through her, something unspoken, something Hannah couldn't name. "Some lessons," Meline said, quiet, "can only be learned by living them, sometimes at a cost you can't undo." The words hung there, heavy. Hannah didn't ask again. She could sense when an answer wasn't meant to be spoken. Below them, Tyler and his friends gathered on the runway edge, pointing up at the little Cessna, laughing as though the sky were theirs to ridicule. Hannah's jaw tightened. "What's so funny about this?" "They think little planes don't count," Meline answered evenly. "They measure worth by speed, by size, not by skill or determination, but the sky doesn't care about their opinions, only about physics, and physics doesn't lie." That was Meline, calm, patient, unreadable. And yet, if anyone had looked close enough, they might have seen her grip on the throttle tighten just a fraction. Might have noticed the way her eyes avoided the contrails high above, where larger aircraft carved their signatures across the blue. But no one looked, no one ever did. Except sometimes at night. Alone in her small apartment, she would reach into her flight bag and unwrap the piece of cloth she kept hidden at the bottom. A patch, edges frayed from years of being handled. Silver wings curling into the shape of a serpent. Bold letters stitched beneath it. "Viper." She'd run her thumb across it until the letters blurred. The past condensed into that single emblem, her call sign, her other life. A life she had buried under layers of routine and silence. She told herself she'd moved on, that she was just Meline Hayes now, flight instructor, guide for nervous teenagers and hobbyists with weekend money to burn. That she found purpose here, watching a 16-year-old boy nail a smooth landing after weeks of shaky attempts, or a single mother save for months just to touch the sky once. That mattered. That was enough. Or it was supposed to be. The crackle of the radio tore through the cockpit, sharper this time. The music that had been filling the background cut out abruptly. Silence. Then, NORAD to Viper. Return immediately for preliminary briefing. Confirm. The words didn't fit. They didn't belong in this cockpit, in this life she'd built out of obscurity. For one second, Hannah thought it was some cruel prank, another joke from the boys below. But the voice, calm, commanding, precise, carried a weight no prank could hold. Her hands froze on the controls. Did they just call someone Viper? Meline's own hands went white around the yoke. Her breathing shallowed. The unshakable instructor, the woman who never flinched, suddenly looked like a ghost had stepped into the cockpit. The radio crackled again, firmer this time. Viper, this is NORAD command. Highest priority communication. Respond on secure channel across Brookhaven Airport. On the ground, mechanics dropped their tools. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. The laughter outside vanished like smoke in the wind. Tyler's voice cut in, broken, confused. Wait, did NORAD just call somebody here? The entire airport seemed to hold its breath. Meline guided the Cessna down, her motions mechanical, precise, but her face pale. Hannah whispered, "They want someone to answer. They want you, don't they?" Meline didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her silence was an answer of its own. The third transmission came like a hammer. Viper, urgent call back. National security priority. Respond within 30 minutes. Silence. Every eye at Brookhaven turned toward the small Cessna taxiing back to the ramp. Mechanics stood still. Flight students leaned against railings. Instructors peered out from the control tower windows. Tyler Brooks no longer smirked. His sunglasses dangled loosely from one hand, forgotten. The quiet woman they had mocked for months, the one they thought only belonged to toy planes, was being called by a name they had never heard. A name that carried weight. A name that made the air heavy with questions. Viper. Hannah's voice trembled. Miss Hayes, NORAD only calls active military pilots. Who are you? Meline shut down the engine, her motions slow, deliberate. Then she slipped the headset from her ears, her hands trembling as she set it aside. She didn't answer at first, just sat there, staring at the radio like it was a ghost from another lifetime. Finally, her voice came low, heavy with something Hannah didn't yet understand. Sometimes, the past doesn't stay buried as deep as we hope. Her hand drifted to her flight bag. She pulled out the cloth she usually kept hidden, unfolded it, and let the silver patch rest in her palm. The serpent coiled, the wings stretched wide. The word glinted in the late afternoon light. Viper. Hannah's eyes widened, her breath caught. "It's you," she whispered. "You're Viper." The hum of the airport returned in broken pieces, murmurs, whispers, the scrape of a tool dropped against pavement. But no one laughed anymore. Meline closed her hand around the patch. For the first time in years, she felt its weight, and with it, the weight of everything she had tried so hard to leave behind. What happens when the truth won't stay hidden, when the world you tried to bury claws its way back into the light? On the bench outside the terminal, Meline Hayes sat motionless, the silver patch still in her hand. The serpent, the wings, the word Viper, it seemed to gleam brighter now, as if the letters themselves refused to be ignored. She didn't look at the crowd forming around the windows, didn't acknowledge the whispers or the stares. Her eyes stayed on the horizon. Inside the lounge, the atmosphere had shifted into something brittle. The laughter that once filled the air had collapsed into uneasy silence. Tyler Brooks leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his sunglasses abandoned on the floor. "It can't be her," he muttered, as though saying it aloud might make it true. "NORAD doesn't just call flight instructors." But Mark Rivera, the airport manager, wasn't so sure. He'd already made calls. The voice on the other end had gone tight, evasive, careful, and that told him more than any direct confirmation ever could. By late afternoon, a black SUV rolled to a stop at the edge of the tarmac. Its door opened, and Colonel Linda Carter stepped out. She hadn't come for Meline. She was supposed to be visiting her nephew, a mechanic. But when she saw the crowd and heard the whispers, her stride quickened. "What's going on here?" she demanded. Rivera's answer came halting, his throat dry. "We intercepted a transmission. NORAD called someone here by the call sign Viper, our instructor Meline Hayes." Carter's expression changed instantly. Color drained from her face, replaced by something heavier, recognition, disbelief, maybe even fear. She turned slowly toward the woman sitting outside with the patch still clutched in her hand. "Did you say Hayes?" Carter's voice was quiet now, too quiet. "Yes, ma'am. Do you know her?" But Carter didn't answer. She was already walking across the pavement, her boots striking hard against the asphalt, each step carrying the weight of years. Meline didn't move when Carter sat down beside her on the bench. She didn't look up, didn't acknowledge her. The two women sat in silence for a long moment, separated only by a sliver of air but united by something invisible. At last Carter spoke. "Captain Meline Viper Hayes, I've wondered for years what became of you." The name twisted in the air. Captain, a rank she hadn't worn in a long time. "Not captain anymore," Meline said quietly. Her voice was flat, stripped of all the confidence it once carried. "Just Meline, I left it all behind." "You can't walk away from being the best fighter pilot the Air Force produced in 2 decades, Carter pressed. "You can't erase the missions you flew, the lives you saved, the records you set." Meline finally turned her eyes toward her. They were tired, lined with shadows no rest could erase. "You don't know what it cost me." "I know enough." But Carter didn't know everything. Not the way the memories still pierced through quiet nights, uninvited and merciless. Not the way one face refused to leave her, even when she closed her eyes. Gabriel Vega, her wingman, her friend, her brother in the sky. She had buried him in silence, carried him in silence, punished herself in silence. "You want to know what I know about Viper?" Carter's voice rose, clear and sharp, carrying to the crowd pressed against the glass. "I know she stopped a terrorist attack on San Diego International by forcing 2 hijacked planes into safe landings. I know she flew 17 straight combat missions without a single failure. I know she set the scramble record in an F-22 Raptor, a record still unbroken." Inside the lounge, jaws fell. Tyler Brooks gripped the edge of his chair, knuckles white. His friends, once smug and laughing, sat wide-eyed, their arrogance dissolving into something closer to shame. But Meline's reply came like a blade dulled by grief. "And I lost my wingman on the 18th, Gabriel Vega. He died because of me, because I misjudged." Her voice cracked, the words barely escaping. "The report cleared me, but nothing cleared what I saw. Nothing erased that." Carter's jaw tightened, her posture straightening as though she might absorb the weight for both of them. Through the window, the crowd leaned closer, straining to catch every word. Carter's voice rose again, not just for Meline but for all of them. "And you mocked her," she said sharply, her gaze cutting to Tyler and the others. "You called her a tow-plane instructor. You laughed at her lessons. You fools have no idea you were standing in the presence of a legend." The word struck like a gavel. Legend. Meline shook her head, her voice hoarse. "I'm not." "You are," Carter insisted, softer now but unyielding. "You think you've hidden from your past by teaching students in small planes, but you haven't. You serve in every lesson, every time you keep a student safe. Every life you protect with your teaching, it's still part of the same mission you've always carried out." Meline's lips parted, but no words came. Her throat worked, her chest rose and fell, but nothing broke the silence. Then the desk phone rang inside Rivera's office. He answered, and his face grew steadily paler. Moments later, he stepped outside, holding a folded slip of paper. He approached the two women slowly, his expression grave. "Ma'am," he said, offering it to Meline. "That was NORAD. Unauthorized aircraft are in restricted airspace. They need immediate advice from someone with your expertise." The paper trembled slightly in his hand. Meline stared at it, then at Carter, then at the crowd whose eyes bored into her. "They're not asking me to fly," she murmured. Her voice carried a mix of relief and dread. "They want my guidance, because within 500 miles, I'm the only one who knows what to do." Carter nodded firmly. "Viper, your country is calling again." The word settled between them, heavy, familiar, unwelcome. Meline closed her eyes. For a moment she was back in the cockpit of the Raptor, the roar of the engines pressing against her chest, Vega's voice steady in her ear. For a moment she was whole. Then the memory fractured, shattered by the sight of fire cutting across the night sky, by the silence that followed when his voice didn't return. She opened her eyes again. This wasn't a Raptor, this wasn't war, this was Brookhaven, and yet the weight was the same. The glass doors creaked open behind her. Tyler Brooks stepped outside, his usual swagger gone. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Ma'am," he said, swallowing hard, I owe you an apology, we all do. We had no idea who you were, what you've done for this country." Meline looked at him, not with anger but with a calm that unsettled him more than any fury would have. "Tyler," she said softly, "the aircraft doesn't make the pilot. The pilot makes the aircraft. Whether it's an F-22 or a Cessna 172, the principles are the same. Safety, precision, respect for the sky." His lips parted as if to answer, but no words came. He only nodded, slowly, ashamed. Behind him the others had gathered, no longer mocking, no longer smirking. They stood with their hands in their pockets, their faces pale, their eyes searching the ground. Meline rose at last, standing taller than she had in years, not because she wanted their respect, but because she remembered suddenly what it meant to stand. "I may have been Viper once," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the tarmac, "but today I'm still just a flight instructor, and my mission now is simple, to make sure everyone gets home safe." Her words lingered, firm, final. She turned toward Rivera's office, the paper still in her hand, her steps measured. The crowd parted silently, giving her space, not because she demanded it, because she had earned it. As the door closed behind her, Brookhaven felt different, quieter, heavier, changed. And outside, a group of young pilots stared after her, realizing for the first time that the sky they had mocked belonged to someone who had mastered it long before they even touched a yoke. What does it feel like to answer a call you swore you'd never hear again? The office smelled faintly of stale coffee and aviation fuel, the kind of small-town airfield scent Meline had grown accustomed to. But now, under the sharp ring of the desk phone still echoing in her ears, the room felt different, heavier. Every sound carried consequence. Rivera stood awkwardly by the door, wringing his hands. He didn't ask questions, didn't try to speak. He knew better. Meline sat down slowly, her back straight, her eyes fixed on the black receiver that seemed to burn on the desk. For a long moment she didn't move. Then, with hands that only trembled once, she picked it up. "Hayes," she said quietly. "Not Viper, not Captain, just Hayes." The line buzzed, a low hum of secure encryption, then a voice cut through. Calm, firm, recognizable in its cadence. "Viper, NORAD command. We need immediate consultation on a developing situation." Her chest tightened. The call sign spoken aloud again felt like a stone pressed against her ribs. She wanted to correct them, to say not Viper anymore, but the words never came. "What's the situation?" A pause, then. 2 aircraft, unregistered, entered restricted airspace over the eastern seaboard, refusing to respond to ATC hails. Civilian transponders off. Their altitude suggests possible long-range incursion. Her hand clenched around the receiver. She knew the pattern. She knew what this sounded like. and she knew exactly how little time there was before options narrowed to something irreversible. "Scramble protocols initiated?" she asked, her voice tighter now. "Yes, Raptor's already airborne out of Langley, but we need advisory. We need your read, Viper. You've seen this profile before." She closed her eyes, and instantly she was back in the cockpit, Vega's voice steady beside her, the night sky alive with movement. She remembered the silence of radar screens that didn't match, the impossible decision of whether to intercept or engage. She remembered how one wrong call had cost him everything. "Do you have visual confirmation?" she asked, forcing her voice steady. "Negative, clouds thick at 25,000. Radar intermittent. Pilots await engagement orders." Her throat tightened. Every word dragged her back into a war she had never truly left. "Hold intercept at 10 miles, she said finally. "Do not provoke, force altitude shift, box them in with speed control. If they're hostile, they'll show it by resisting the maneuver. If not," she trailed off, catching her breath, "then we don't need coffins tonight." The silence on the other end was brief but heavy. Then, "Understood, Viper. Advisory relayed. Stand by for updates." The line went dead. Meline sat motionless, the receiver still pressed to her ear, her pulse hammering against her temples. When she finally set it down, Rivera cleared his throat gently. Are you back in?" he asked. Her eyes cut to him, sharp but not unkind. "No, I gave them advice, that's all." "Advice that might save lives." "Or cost them," she muttered. He said nothing more. Meline rose slowly and walked back toward the door. She paused at the threshold, knowing what waited outside: eyes, whispers, questions she couldn't answer. But when she stepped through, the murmur of voices hushed instantly. Every pilot, every mechanic, every student turned toward her. Their faces carried something new, not mockery, not dismissal, but awe. She hated it. Her gaze swept over them all, then landed on Hannah Lee, who stood a little apart from the crowd. The girl's eyes were wide, not with fear, but with something like pride. And that, more than anything, made Meline's chest ache. "Class dismissed for today," she said flatly. Her voice carried authority without effort. "Go home, study your checklists. Tomorrow we fly again." Nobody moved at first. Then slowly they began to disperse, quiet, subdued, as though leaving a ceremony rather than a lesson. Tyler lingered at the back, his friends gone. He met her eyes briefly, opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again and walked away. Meline exhaled, shoulders sagging once the crowd thinned. But the silence that followed was worse than the laughter had ever been. That night she sat alone in her apartment, the silver patch lying on the table beside her. She poured herself a glass of water, not whiskey. She'd promised herself years ago she'd never dull the edges of memory that way. She owed Vega that much. But she couldn't escape the voice of command echoing in her head. "Viper, we need your read." She remembered the way Carter's eyes had softened when she said she still served, even here. She remembered Hannah's voice. It felt like you trusted the wind with more than a training flight. And she remembered the silence after Vega's jet vanished into fire. Her phone buzzed once, startling her. An unknown number. She stared at it for a long moment before answering. Meline Hayes. A pause, then a voice she hadn't heard in years. "This is Commander Jeffries, NORAD. I was Vega's co. I know you don't want calls like this, but I want you to know your advisory saved 2 civilian aircraft tonight. Misfiled flight plans, poor comms, panicked pilots. Could have been tragedy. Instead, they landed safe." Her throat closed. She pressed her fist against her mouth to hold back the sound rising in her chest. "You saved them," Jeffries continued quietly. "You still carry it, Hayes. Whether you want to or not, thought you deserved to know." The line clicked dead before she could reply. She sat there, staring at the phone, her eyes burning. Slowly, she reached for the patch, pressing it against her palm until the edges dug into her skin. The past hadn't stayed buried, and maybe it wasn't meant to. At Brookhaven the next morning, whispers had spread like wildfire. Everyone knew, or thought they knew. Tyler was waiting outside the hangar when she arrived, his posture awkward, his arrogance gone. "Ma'am," he said carefully, I was hoping you'd look at my landings. I've been sloppy. I want to get better." The words surprised her, but she saw it in his eyes, the uncertainty, the fragile determination. She remembered herself at his age, overconfident, desperate to prove something. "Fine," she said simply. "We'll review, but leave the swagger on the ground. The sky doesn't tolerate pride." He nodded quickly, grateful, relieved. Inside the lounge, Hannah waited nervously, clutching her flight logbook. When Meline entered, she smiled shyly. "Miss Hayes, yesterday when the radio called you Viper, I wasn't scared." "No." Hannah shook her head. "It made sense. I always felt like you weren't just teaching me to fly. You were teaching me something bigger, like safety meant more to you than the sky itself." Meline's throat tightened. She wanted to correct her, to tell her the truth, that safety had cost her too much, that she carried a ghost every time she touched a yoke. But the words refused to form. Instead, she only nodded. "Go pre-flight the Cessna. We'll work on your takeoffs." As Hannah hurried off, Colonel Carter appeared again in the doorway. She approached quietly, lowering her voice so only Meline could hear. "You don't have to carry it all alone," Carter said. Meline met her gaze. "Don't I?" "No, you carry enough by teaching them. That's what service looks like now. That's what Gabriel would want." The name struck like a physical blow. Meline looked away, her jaw clenched. She couldn't speak his name without feeling the night sky cave in around her. But Carter's words lingered. That's what Gabriel would want. For the first time in years, the thought didn't feel like punishment. That evening, after another long day of lessons, Meline returned to her apartment. On the table beside the patch lay a new photograph, Hannah grinning after her first smooth landing, her arms raised in triumph. Meline picked it up, studying the joy in the girl's eyes. Slowly, she placed it beside the patch in the box she kept locked away. This time, she didn't close the lid. The past was no longer something to hide. It was something to protect, something to guide. She whispered into the quiet apartment, the words catching but steady. "I still serve, just one student at a time." Outside her window, Brookhaven's runway lights glowed softly against the dark. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of something she hadn't in a long time. Not pride, not absolution. Hope. How do you guide others when you still feel lost yourself? At Brookhaven, the mood shifted slowly, like the changing of seasons. Gone was the careless laughter that once chased her across the tarmac. In its place grew a hushed respect, the kind that felt fragile, as if one misstep could break it. For Meline Hayes, the attention was uncomfortable. She had lived for years in the shadows of obscurity, choosing quiet over recognition, humility over reputation. But the whispers had a way of finding her anyway. Everywhere she walked, heads turned. Students followed her with their eyes, as though she carried some secret code to the sky itself. She didn't feel like a codebreaker. She felt like a ghost. Hannah Lee arrived early now, long before her lessons were scheduled. She stood by the Cessna with her logbook in hand, waiting for Meline like a soldier reporting for duty. "I reviewed the emergency procedures 3 times, she said proudly one morning. Meline only nodded. "Good, but memorization won't save you. Instinct will, and instinct only comes from practice. Let's get airborne." Hannah lit up, eager, her fear slowly giving way to confidence. Each time they flew, her hands grew steadier on the yoke, her corrections more natural. And yet what she wanted most wasn't just technique. It was something deeper. She watched Meline closely, not just her words but the pauses between them, the way her eyes drifted when she mentioned trust, or safety, or wind. Hannah sensed that her instructor wasn't only teaching flying. She was teaching survival of a kind that came from scars. One afternoon, during a break between flights, Hannah asked quietly, "Do you ever miss it? The faster planes, I mean. The jets." Meline froze. She hadn't expected the question, not from her. She kept her gaze on the horizon. "Sometimes," she admitted softly. "But missing it doesn't mean I want it back. The sky is the same at 10,000 feet as it is at 50. The difference is what you're carrying inside." Hannah tilted her head. "And what do you carry?" For a moment, Meline thought about answering, about saying his name aloud, about letting Vega live again, even just for a moment. But the words lodged in her throat, and all she managed was, "Enough." The silence that followed carried more truth than any explanation could. Meanwhile, Tyler Brooks struggled with his own shift. Once the loudest voice of ridicule, he now approached her with the humility of a man stripped of his pride. He started staying late, practicing touch-and-goes until the runway lights blinked against the dusk. He asked questions quietly, listened carefully, and when he erred, he accepted correction without complaint. Still, Meline could see the weight of his shame. Every time his eyes flicked toward her, there was an unspoken apology in them, one he had already offered but never stopped giving. She didn't need the words. She only needed his effort. "Flying isn't about proving yourself," she told him one evening after a shaky approach. "It's about control, control of the aircraft, of the moment, and of yourself. You learn that and you'll be more than a pilot. You'll be safe." He nodded, sweat glistening at his temple. "Yes, ma'am." The transformation in Tyler didn't go unnoticed. Other students began to follow his lead, seeking Meline's guidance not because of her call sign but because of the clarity with which she spoke. They didn't see her as a legend anymore. They saw her as a teacher, and in that she found a strange kind of peace. But peace was fragile. It always was. At night, when the airport grew quiet and the runway lights blinked against the dark, Meline returned home to an apartment too small for memories that large. She sat at her table, the patch beside Hannah's photo, and let the silence press against her chest. She thought of Gabriel Vega, his laugh low and easy, his voice in her headset, steady, teasing, confident. She thought of the way his jet had vanished in a blossom of fire, the way her own scream had echoed against the canopy, unheard by anyone but herself. The reports had said lucky shot, an untraceable missile from the ground, a strike no pilot could have avoided, but she didn't believe in luck. She believed in responsibility. And no matter what the files said, she knew the truth. She had been the flight lead. His survival had been her duty, and she had failed. Sometimes, in the stillness, she whispered his name into the dark, Gabriel, as though the sound might tether him to her a little longer. One evening, unable to hold it in, she picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't touched in years. "Mrs. Vega," her voice shook as the line connected. It's Meline. I know it's been too long." There was silence on the other end, then a quiet, trembling breath. "Meline. I wanted you to know I still fly. Not combat, just teaching, but I keep them safe. All of them. I think Gabriel would." Her voice cracked. "I think he would be proud." Tears stung her eyes. She gripped the phone tighter. Mrs. Vega's reply was simple, but it struck like lightning. "He would. He always believed in you." The line clicked dead, leaving Meline alone in the quiet. But for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like a presence. The next morning at Brookhaven, she carried herself differently. Not taller, not prouder, just steadier. Hannah noticed. So did Tyler. So did the mechanics who had once dismissed her as just another instructor. There was a calm in her now, a clarity, as though she had accepted something she had been running from. During a lesson that afternoon, Hannah asked her again, "Why do you always say safety first? You talk about it like it's a mission." Meline's hands rested on the yoke, guiding the Cessna into a smooth descent. Her eyes stayed on the horizon. "Because it is," she said simply. "Every time you take someone into the sky, you're responsible for bringing them home. That's the mission. That's always the mission." Her words carried into Hannah's bones, anchoring deeper than any checklist or textbook ever could. Later, Tyler asked her quietly, "Do you ever regret it, not being in the jets anymore?" Meline studied him, his boyish face now lined with earnestness. She thought about the roar of the engines, the adrenaline of the scramble, the rush of speed. She thought about Vega's laugh in her ear. And then she thought about Hannah's trembling hands growing steady, about Ethan's smile after his first landing, about Laura Diaz, the single mother, bursting with joy when she touched the sky for the first time. "No," she said finally, "I don't regret this, because this is where I'm needed now." Tyler nodded slowly, absorbing the words like scripture. The weeks passed and the air at Brookhaven thickened with something new. Not fear, not reverence, but respect. Genuine, hard-earned respect. Mechanics stopped her to ask about maintenance techniques. Students sought her advice not just on maneuvers but on life in the cockpit. Even instructors who had once overlooked her now deferred to her judgment. Meline didn't ask for any of it. She didn't revel in it, but she accepted it, because she knew now that this was her way of serving, not through classified missions or combat sorties, but through teaching others to respect the sky, to respect themselves, to survive. Still, late at night the past remained. Vega remained. The fire remained. Some wounds never fully close. But as she placed Hannah's photo beside the patch each evening, she whispered a new truth into the quiet. "I found another way to serve." And for the first time, the words didn't feel like an excuse. They felt like redemption. What happens when a community realizes the quiet figure among them has been guarding skis they never even imagined? At Brookhaven, weeks slipped by, though no one could truly say things had returned to normal. The routines looked the same, engines rumbling to life, students fumbling through checklists, mechanics wiping grease from their hands. But beneath it all lingered a quiet shift. Respect. Caution. A recognition that their modest instructor carried more in her silence than the rest of them did in their boasts. Meline Hayes did not change her habits. She arrived the same way she always had, hair tied back in a plain ponytail, worn jacket creaking with age. She checked her Cessna with the same deliberate care, walked students through the same dry procedures. But the way they watched her was different. Every word weighed more now, every correction carried authority that no one dared challenge. It unsettled her. One afternoon she overheard two young pilots whispering in the hangar. She could have been anything. She could be flying Raptors right now. Why she wasting her time here? Wasting. The word cut sharper than any insult had, because it echoed something she asked herself in the quiet hours, when the runway lights blinked against the dark, when the patch lay beside her bed like a question she hadn't answered. Was she wasting the gift she'd once carried, or had she finally learned how to use it? She told herself it didn't matter, that every life she kept safe through teaching mattered as much as any mission she'd ever flown, but the whispers still stung. Hannah Lee, on the other hand, carried none of that doubt. If anything, she seemed more determined than ever. She studied longer, asked sharper questions, flew with a growing confidence that startled even Meline. After a smooth landing one evening, Hannah grinned across the cockpit. "You know what I think?" she asked, eyes bright. "What's that?" "I think you're still on a mission. You just don't wear the uniform anymore." The words startled Meline. For a long moment she didn't answer, only stared out across the tarmac where dusk settled like a blanket. "Maybe," she said finally, "maybe the mission changes shape, but it never ends." Hannah nodded as though it were the most obvious truth in the world. It wasn't just Hannah who noticed. Tyler Brooks, once arrogant and loud, had transformed into something quieter. His swagger was gone, replaced by an earnest hunger to learn. He stayed long after lessons ended, running drills until his arms shook from fatigue. He asked her about procedures she thought no one his age would care to master. One evening, after a particularly rough crosswind landing, he shut down the engine and turned to her, his face flushed. How do you do it? How do you stay calm? I swear my heart stops every time I see the runway coming at me sideways." Meline studied him, the sweat dripping down his temple, the raw honesty in his voice. She thought about Vega, his calm, his steadiness, the way his laughter had steadied her in moments of chaos. "You train until calm isn't a choice," she said softly. "It's a reflex. That's what keeps you alive, not bravado, not luck, training." Tyler nodded, eyes wide, absorbing the words like scripture. For the first time, she believed he might actually carry them. But even as she built something new at Brookhaven, the past refused to release her. NORAD called again. Not as dramatic as the first time, not on open frequency. This time it was quiet, discreet, routed directly to Rivera's office phone. But the effect was the same. She answered, her voice steady now, though her pulse spiked. "Hayes." "Viper," the commander's voice replied. "We have an advisory request. Intercepts running on the northern corridor. Drone signatures, possibly hostile. We need your analysis." Her eyes closed, again the name, again the demand. She gave them what they needed: altitudes, timing, maneuver strategies that could protect without provoking. Her voice was calm, clinical, precise. She hung up, exhaled, and told herself it was just advice. But when she walked back out into the lounge, she felt their eyes again. The whispers, the awe. "Was that NORAD?" someone murmured. "She's still connected. She's still." She silenced them with a look, not harsh, just final. Later that evening, as she locked up the hangar, Carter appeared once more, leaning against the doorway. "You can keep pretending you're not back in it," Carter said gently. "But you are. They'll keep calling, and you'll keep answering, because you can't not." Meline shook her head. "I left for a reason." "I know," Carter said. "Gabriel Vega, you've been punishing yourself ever since. But Meline, that wasn't your fault." The name cracked through her like lightning. She turned away, her hands tightening around the lock. "You don't know that," she whispered. Carter's voice softened further. "I do. I read the file. I read every line. You couldn't have saved him. No one could have. But you've been carrying the weight of his death as though it was yours to bear. Maybe it's time to let him rest." Meline didn't answer. Couldn't. The words pressed against something too raw to touch. That night she sat at her table again, the patch in one hand, Hannah's photo in the other. She stared at them until her vision blurred, until both seemed to merge. The past and the present. The soldier and the teacher. The failure and the chance at redemption. She whispered into the silence, not sure if she was speaking to Vega or to herself. "I'm still here, I'm still serving. Does that count?" The answer never came, only silence. But somehow, for the first time, silence didn't feel like condemnation. It felt like permission. The next morning she arrived early. Tyler was already there, pre-flighting a trainer with unusual care. Hannah appeared moments later, waving her logbook like a banner. Even Ethan, the 16-year-old whose plane she had quietly repaired months before, showed up with a grin and nervous energy. They all wanted to fly with her. They all wanted to learn from her, not because she was Viper, not because of NORAD, but because she was Meline Hayes, the woman who demanded safety above swagger, the instructor who believed in them before they believed in themselves. And slowly, she began to believe in herself again. On the third call from NORAD, weeks later, she didn't flinch when the phone rang. She didn't stumble when the commander called her Viper. She listened, she advised, and when she hung up, she simply returned to the Cessna where Hannah waited. "You ready?" she asked. Hannah nodded, smiling nervously. "Then let's fly." It wasn't the roar of the Raptor, wasn't the rush of a scramble. But as the Cessna lifted into the sky, Meline felt something she hadn't in years. Not absolution, not glory. Purpose. And perhaps that was enough. What happens when the past doesn't just call you back, but tests you through someone else's hands? The morning air at Brookhaven shimmered with heat, even though it was early. Summer had a way of pressing against the tarmac, turning every pre-flight check into a sweat-soaked ritual. Meline Hayes moved through it calmly, clipboard steady in her hand, eyes scanning every bolt, every surface of the Cessna. Her students watched her closely, mimicking her patience. "Never rush a checklist," she reminded them. "The time you think you save here, you'll pay for later, maybe with more than time." They nodded, scribbling notes, their usual chatter subdued. Respect had settled into them like a new discipline, heavier but sharper than before. Hannah Lee climbed into the cockpit with her usual nervous energy, while Ethan Park hovered close by, eager for his turn later. Tyler Brooks lingered at the back of the group, sunglasses gone, his jaw tight with focus. Meline guided Hannah through the startup sequence, watching carefully as the engine coughed to life. "Good," she said quietly. "Now remember what I told you about trust." "Trust the wind," Hannah repeated, a small smile tugging at her lips. Meline's own lips curved slightly, the closest she came to a smile. They taxied out, the other students watching from the fence line. The Cessna lifted gracefully, the horizon tilting as Hannah leveled them into a steady climb. Meline let her take the lead, her own hands resting lightly, ready but not interfering. For 10 minutes everything was smooth, routine, ordinary. Then it was. A sputter, a cough. The engine shuddered, coughing hard enough that the entire frame trembled. The hum of steady power cut into a stuttering gasp. Hannah's eyes went wide. "Miss Hayes." "Stay calm," Meline said instantly, her own voice steady as stone. "Hands steady, nose level, don't fight it." The engine sputtered again, then caught for a heartbeat, then dropped into silence. The propeller spun uselessly in the wind. Dead. 100 feet below, Ethan froze at the fence. Tyler's stomach dropped as he watched the Cessna falter. In the cockpit, Hannah's breath came fast and shallow. "It's gone. What do I do? What do I do?" Meline's voice cut clean through the panic. "We fly the plane. Always fly the plane. Pick a field." Hannah's eyes darted across the patchwork ground below. Too many trees. Too many rooftops. "Trust the wind," Meline whispered. Her hand slid calmly onto the yoke, guiding Hannah's trembling grip. "Feel it. It'll tell you where it wants to carry us." A clearing opened ahead, narrow, uneven, but enough. Meline pointed. "There, commit to it. Nose down slightly, don't stall, you've got this." Her words were calm, precise, but inside her chest something roared awake. Instinct. Training. The part of her she'd buried under years of silence surged back like fire through her veins. She was back in the Raptor, back in the chaos of a crippled sky, only this time it wasn't her jet falling, it was Hannah's hands holding the yoke. "Keep it steady," she said, her voice low but firm. "Trust your instruments, don't fight what you can't control, work with it." The clearing loomed closer. Hannah's breath hitched, but her grip steadied under Meline's calm hand. Together they guided the powerless Cessna down, wind rushing louder as gravity pulled. The earth rose fast. Then contact, a hard jolt. The frame rattled, bounced, skidded rough across uneven ground. Dust and grass flew up against the windshield. The plane shuddered, groaned, but held. "Silence." Hannah gasped, tears springing to her eyes. We made it." Meline released her own breath slowly, her hands loosening. "You made it," she corrected softly. Back at Brookhaven, chaos erupted. Mechanics scrambled for trucks. Students shouted, pointing toward the field where the little plane had gone down safely. Tyler sprinted toward Rivera, breathless. "They're okay, right? They have to be okay." When the pickup trucks reached them, Meline was already outside, checking Hannah for injuries. The girl shook, but she was whole. "Textbook dead stick landing," Meline said evenly to the mechanics. "Engine gone, but the pilot's intact. That's what matters." "The pilot," Hannah whispered, still trembling. Meline looked at her firmly. "Yes, the pilot. You flew that landing, Hannah. Don't ever forget it." Word spread fast. Within the hour, everyone at Brookhaven knew what had happened. And for the second time, silence hung heavy across the airport, not the silence of laughter cut short, but the silence of awe. Tyler approached her later, voice low. "You saved her." Meline shook her head. "She saved herself. I just reminded her what she already knew." But that night when she sat alone at her kitchen table, the memory wouldn't leave her. The look in Hannah's eyes when the engine died. The way her own instincts had taken over, the calm she hadn't felt in years. It was the same calm she'd carried in combat, the same voice that had guided squadrons through chaos, the same instinct that had failed to save Vega. She poured a glass of water, her hand trembling. The patch lay on the table. The photo of Hannah's first solo lay beside it. She touched them both, the past and present pressed together under her fingertips. She whispered into the quiet, "I can't lose another." The words were half prayer, half vow. The next morning Hannah returned, pale but determined. "I want to fly again," she told Meline, her voice shaking but steady. "If I don't, I'll always be afraid." Meline studied her carefully, then she nodded once. "Good. Fear is natural, but we don't let it own us. We respect it and then we fly anyway." The lesson that day was quiet, deliberate. Every maneuver carried the echo of what had happened, but Hannah didn't falter. When they landed, her hands were steady. "You're stronger than you think," Meline told her quietly. Tyler waited at the edge of the ramp, watching. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced by something almost reverent. When Meline passed, he spoke softly. "I get it now," he said. "Flying isn't about showing off, it's about coming back safe." She paused, looked at him, and nodded. "Now you're starting to understand." That night, alone again, she allowed herself one fragile truth. Maybe these lessons, these lives she kept safe, was how she kept Vega alive. Maybe every time a student landed safely, it was her way of saying, "I didn't fail you completely." Outside her window, Brookhaven's runway lights flickered in the dark. The airport had changed. She had changed. And though she still carried the past like a scar, she carried something else now too. Hope. Not for herself. For them. What happens when the world refuses to let you stay small? At Brookhaven, the emergency landing became legend before the sun even set. Students replayed it in hushed tones. Mechanics described the dust still clinging to the Cessna's wheels, and by nightfall word had traveled far beyond the airport gates. Local reporters called Rivera's office. A few even showed up, cameras in hand, sniffing for a story. Meline wanted none of it. She waved them off, turning her back on microphones, her answers clipped and final. "The student flew the landing. That's the only story here." But the whispers grew anyway. Quiet Hayes, the tollplane instructor, the woman they dismissed. She wasn't just competent, she was something else entirely. Tyler Brooks felt it keenly. Every time he caught sight of her across the tarmac, guilt burned in his chest. He remembered the laughter, the mockery, the careless words he had thrown like stones. Now they weighed him down like chains. One afternoon, after another round of practice, he lingered until the others left. "Ma'am," he began, his voice hesitant. "I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I'm sorry. I was stupid. I thought flying was about swagger. You showed me it's about something else." Meline looked at him steadily, her expression unreadable. Then she said, "The sky doesn't care about apologies, Tyler. It only cares how you fly today, so prove it. Fly better, safer, for yourself, for the people who trust you." He nodded, eyes stinging. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a path. Hannah, meanwhile, blossomed. After the emergency, something in her hardened not into arrogance but into resilience. She studied longer, asked sharper questions, practiced until dusk. When she faltered, she didn't collapse, she steadied. "You taught me more than flying that day," she told Meline once. "You taught me what it means to stay calm when everything falls apart. I'll never forget that." Meline's throat tightened, but she only nodded. Inside, the words echoed louder than Hannah could know. Yet even as Brookhaven shifted, The outside world closed in. NORAD called again, not a dramatic open-frequency summons this time, but a discreet request routed directly through Carter. "They want you in D.C., Carter told her quietly one evening. "Advisory role, not flying, just strategy." Meline's jaw tightened. "No. You could save lives, Meline." "I already do," she snapped, sharper than intended. Then softer. "Every student who walks away safe is a life saved. That's my mission now." Carter studied her for a long moment. "You can pretend all you want, but they'll keep calling. And we both know why. Because when the sky turns dangerous, there are only a handful of people who know how to read it. And you're one of them." Meline looked away, her chest tight. She didn't want this. She didn't want the weight of nations pressing against her shoulders again. She wanted the quiet of Brookhaven, the steady rhythm of lessons, the small victories of her students. But the truth gnawed at her. She still had the knowledge, still had the instincts, still had the call sign whether she spoke it or not. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table, the patch in her hand, the photo of Hannah beside it. In the silence she spoke as though Vega were there. "They want me back, not in the cockpit but close enough. I can't do it, Gabriel. I can't lose another. I can't be responsible again." The silence offered no answer, but in her mind she heard his voice anyway, calm, steady, teasing. "You've been responsible since the first time you touched a yoke. You just don't get to choose when it ends." She pressed the patch to her chest, eyes burning. The next day Rivera pulled her aside. "There's a ceremony Saturday," he said awkwardly. "The town council wants to recognize you for what you did, for what you are." "No," she said instantly. He frowned. "It's not optional. They'll show up here if you don't." She exhaled, long and heavy. She hated attention, hated being placed on a pedestal she didn't deserve, but she knew resisting would only magnify the spectacle. So she stood on the small stage in the town square that weekend, the mayor droning on about bravery, about service, about unsung heroes. She kept her eyes down, hands folded, every instinct screaming to walk away. When the microphone was finally offered, she shook her head. But the crowd urged, and silence pressed in until she could no longer refuse. Her voice, when it came, was steady but low. "I am not a hero, I am a teacher. My students are the ones who matter. They are the future. They're the reason I fly at all." The crowd murmured, moved, but she wasn't finished. "And if there's one thing I've learned," she continued, "it's that dignity doesn't shout. It doesn't demand medals or attention. It simply does the work, quietly, consistently, every day." Her words cut through the square like wind through leaves. Some lowered their heads. Some blinked back tears. Tyler stood at the back, hands clenched, vowing silently to live up to what she had just said. She stepped away without waiting for applause. The crowd rose anyway. That night the phone rang again. Rivera handed it to her, his face pale. "This is NORAD command," the voice said. "We're dealing with unidentified craft over restricted airspace again. We need your analysis immediately." Meline closed her eyes, the weight pressing down once more. She wanted to say no, wanted to hang up, to return to her students, to stay in the small world she had built. But she thought of Hannah, of Tyler, of every student who trusted her to guide them safely. She thought of Gabriel Vega. And slowly she answered, "This is Hayes. What's your situation? What does it mean to finally accept the name you've been running from?" The call lasted hours. Rivera gave her the office, packing outside while the blinds rattled in the evening breeze. Meline sat stiffly at the desk, pens scratching across paper as commanders, voices carried through the line. They trusted her read on patterns, on maneuvers, on threats she recognized before they even finished describing them. Her voice never shook. It was calm, clinical, precise, the same tone she'd used in combat briefings years ago. But when the line finally went dead, she sat in the silence, her hands trembling, sweat beading at her temples. She wasn't flying anymore. but she felt the same exhaustion she had after sorties, the same bone-deep drain of responsibility. When she stepped outside, the night air hit her like a wave. The crowd that had gathered earlier was gone now, leaving only Carter, leaning against a truck with her arms crossed. "You still have it," Carter said simply. Meline shook her head. "I don't want it." "That doesn't matter, it's part of you." Meline's jaw tightened. She wanted to argue, wanted to push back, but her silence was answer enough. For the next weeks, life at Brookhaven unfolded strangely. Students treated her with reverence that bordered on worship. Hannah looked at her not just as a teacher, but as something closer to a guardian. Tyler carried himself with quiet discipline, as though every flight was a way of proving her faith in him. And yet for Meline, the burden never eased. Each time the phone rang, she braced. Each time her students lifted into the air, she felt the old fear coil in her chest, the fear of loss. One evening, after a long day of lessons, she found a note tucked beneath the windshield of her Cessna. Ethan's handwriting, awkward but sincere. "Miss Hayes, I don't know if the stories are true, but I don't care. You've made me believe I can do this. You've made me believe in myself. Thank you." She held the note a long time, her chest tightening. It wasn't medals or commendations. It wasn't the roar of jets, but somehow it meant more. That night she called Mrs. Vega again. Her voice was steadier this time. "I wanted you to know," she said quietly. "I still fly and I still protect, not the same way as before, but I think Gabriel would be proud." There was silence, then a soft reply. "He already is." When the line went dead, tears slid down Meline's face, but they were different this time. Not the bitter tears of guilt, but something closer to release. The following morning she stood before her class of students, Hannah, Tyler, Ethan, and half a dozen others. They watched her intently, waiting for instruction. "You think flying is about freedom," she told them. "About speed, about control, but it is. Flying is about responsibility. Every time you lift into the air, you're carrying lives in your hands, yours and sometimes others. Never forget that." They nodded solemn. "And remember this," she added. "The aircraft doesn't make the pilot makes the aircraft. Respect the sky, respect the machine, and respect yourselves." Her words etched into them deeper than any maneuver. That evening, as the sun bled gold across the horizon, she walked alone along the runway. Her boots echoed softly against the asphalt, the air carrying the faint scent of jet fuel and grass. She stopped halfway, staring at the lights flickering on one by one. She pulled the patch from her pocket, the silver threads catching the last light of day. She studied it for a long moment, then placed it carefully back into her bag, not hidden this time, not buried, just carried. She whispered into the wind, "I'm still Viper, but I'm also Meline, and that's enough." The weeks turned into months. Enrollment at Brookhaven soared. Students traveled from towns away just to learn from the quiet instructor with the steady voice. They came not for glory, not for swagger, but to learn the lessons she embodied: precision, humility, responsibility. The airport itself changed. Where once there had been laughter at her expense, there was now silence when she spoke. Where there had been mockery, there was now pride. And in the instructor's office, a new photo hung on the wall, Meline smiling faintly beside Hannah after her first solo. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Excellence does not always wear a uniform." But perhaps the truest monument was unseen. It was in the way Tyler checked his lists 3 times instead of rushing. In the way Hannah coached new students with patience she had learned from Meline. In the way Ethan whispered, "Trust the wind," before every landing. Her influence had rooted itself quietly, deeply, where it mattered most. One night, alone again in her apartment, she lit a small candle and placed it by the window. She laid the patch beside it, and next to that, Hannah's photo. For the first time, she felt no need to separate them. Past and present, soldier and teacher, Viper and Meline, all of it belonged to her. She spoke softly, as though Vega might still be listening. I found another way to serve. I protect them, one student at a time, and I'll keep doing it until the sky takes me back. Outside, the candle flickered against the glass, its reflection merging with the runway lights in the distance. And maybe, just maybe, in that quiet moment, dignity itself looked like this. Not medals, not headlines, not applause, but a woman who carried her past with grace, who chose to serve without recognition, who taught others to respect the sky. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.